All right. Continuing with aviation weather, we need to discuss aviation weather services. Basically, this information is all found in the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, Chapter 13. So that is something you do need to look through. I'm going to hopefully briefly cover the items that will be most pertinent to the FAA written exam in this module and the next module. So this one and the next one. Aviation weather services. We've talked about aviation weather, and we're going to talk some more about that a little later in the semester. But aviation weather services is a specific study in how aviation weather, whether it's a report or a forecast, how it is transmitted to us, the user, and how we, as the user, can interpret these reports. All right, there's two different kinds. There's observations and there's forecast. Observations are simply the weather reports. That's an observation that's made by, could be a human being, could be a pilot, could observe the weather. Most likely, it's an automated weather station located at these different airports all over the country. I believe there's somewhere a little over 600 throughout the whole country. This information is automatically collected and transmitted into the system on encoded reports, so we can all understand it. Forecasters use those to come up with their forecast. They see the observations, and then they can make predictions about what may happen in the future. That's the other kind, of course, is forecast. But the forecasters use this information, well, to present current weather conditions and to extrapolate that into some kind of forecast as well. Forecasts simply are predictions of the development and or movement of weather phenomena based on those observations. And in addition, they have developed these mathematical models that help them to predict what may happen in the future. The nature of the world is that there are so many different variables that it's difficult. Granted, it's difficult to make accurate forecasts. They do a pretty good job. Short term, long term gets a little bit more, well, it's definitely way more difficult further down the time period you get in the future. But they do a pretty good job with this information. So we should never be surprised when the forecast is not accurate. Let's put it that way. Okay. Aviation routine weather reports, or METARs, is what they call them in short. It's the primary observation code used in the United States, and internationally as well. It indicates it's, generally speaking, like I said, it's mostly from an automated weather observation system. And that's why it'll say in a METAR, if it is from one of those things, it'll have auto, just auto in either A01 or A02. Just means it's automated. You don't very often see it in any other format. And of course, like I said, it could be from an air traffic control tower, it could be from a pilot. These reports come from many different sources. But a METAR is almost always going to be from an automated weather service. Manned aircraft, right, will report the weather as they go along as well. So here's an example of a METAR report, and the graphic here is just explaining the format and what each little term means. We've covered this already in the concepts course, but just to review, for your own sake, review this, make sure, because on the exam, they're going to have an example of this, and they'll ask you a question about it. What's the temperature at Oak City presently? And, you have to look for the temperature. So let's see, temperature would be right there. All right, 18 degrees. So this is something that you ought to be familiar with. So the METAR report includes airport identifier, time of observation, wind visibility, runway visual range if necessary, present weather phenomena, sky conditions, temperature, dew point, altimeter settings. That's the body of the report. Further down there, you'll see remark. That's the extra part to explain what's going on, perhaps. And A02 says it's the automated system has observed a thunderstorm beginning TSB B at 2.5 past the hour, thunderstorm overhead, moving east, sea level pressure. So there's the body of the forecast, or of the report, and then there's the remark part. And it all depends. Sometimes there'll be remarks, sometimes there won't, of course. There may not be any remarks. So just make sure you understand how to interpret a METAR, because that will come up. Observations are simply raw data reports, and the METAR is the primary observation code used, especially in the United States. We have weather charts that will depict the actual weather at the observation time. So they'll take all these reports together, and the weather, I call them weather forecasters, but just the professional weather people will put it together into a chart so that you'll be able to reference it. You go online to weather, to one of the FAA weather sites, and you can look for these weather depiction charts. So they're telling what is the weather right now. There's the different kinds of surface prognostic chart, which is right now. This is what it looks like right now. Gives the location of frontal activity, gives those isobar reports. We get this big, from this we get this big picture view of the weather situation. All right, so if you're planning a weekend at the beach, or you're going to go on an assignment, you can look at these and say, okay, from what I see here, it's not a prediction, but it's telling what it is right now. You can sort of make your own prediction. Then, of course, we have a radar summary chart, which will show actually radar. It'll accumulate all the radar sites throughout the country, as many as they can anyway, that are operating, of course. Puts it all together into a giant mosaic, so you'll be able to see where the actual rain shower is. And also, chances are, there may be some, you'll be able to see it moving too, sort of get a rough idea where it's moving. It may be a slight delay. It may not be. Obviously, the surface prog chart is only accurate at the moment it was made. Then, of course, we have satellite imagery as well, a collection of satellite images. It will give you cloud covers. It can give you moisture readings, temperature readings. A lot of different things can come from satellites. They're pretty sensitive. All right. Now we have forecast, of course, and forecast are, we have different kinds of forecasts as well. We have what they call an area forecast, which will cover multi-state area. This is what we think. This is what the weather forecasters, by looking at the METARs and all of the other weather information, including radar reports and satellite reports, they can make some predictions about what they think will happen in a particular multi-state area. But they can also look at, they also can develop terminal area forecasts, which are specifically for an airport, a terminal airport. So it may cover several airports if they're close together, I suppose. So these trained technicians analyze these various weather reports and also global patterns, so that they may produce charts and maybe a graphical chart, but it may just be textual forecast for various transportation users. These reports are used by truckers and in the sea and the airlines, obviously, and for us as well. So let's see. We'll continue with area forecast. By the way, they're called FAs, area forecast, right? And they just, instead of putting AF, they put an FA, just not to be confusing. Multi-state regions are, for example, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, Florida. Those are our region, you can see these different regions, is the Northeast, and there's a central Chicago area, Boston area, Salt Lake City area, Dallas area. Okay, so these are basically larger. They are also coded very similar to METARs, except because it's a forecast, it will have forecast periods of time. And we'll look at that in a little bit. These regions, by the way, are called Flight Information Regions, FIRs. You don't need to memorize that, but area forecast work along with airmets and sigmets and convective sigmets, etc. They're used to determine forecasts for en route weather and to interpolate conditions at airports which do not have a terminal aerodrome forecast, right? We talked about those terminal areas as well. A lot of airports don't have those forecasts. It serves as a flight planning tool, is used for weather briefing for general aviation pilots. Drone pilots can use this to have a rough idea what it will be like in the short term and perhaps even in the long term. Okay, then we have area forecast. Area forecasts are for specific areas. That sort of gives it away. The name of it sort of gives it away. It's a more concise statement of the expected meteorological conditions significant to aviation for a specific time period within 5 statute miles of the center of the airport's runway complex. Okay, so it's for a specific airport. If you're 50 miles away from the source of this terminal area forecast, then it may not be very accurate. For a radius of 5 miles from the airport, they're saying this is the forecast for that area. They're called a TAF. For terminal area forecast, which that makes sense. So we look for the TAF, but there's different kinds. There's a TAF amended, so we have a forecast, but then things may change. The forecasters may come back and put an amendment to it and say, well, things have changed from what we thought it was going to be. And then we can have a corrected one where, whoops, we made a mistake. We typed in the wrong letter, something like that. So there's different kinds of TAFs, but basically it's the same thing. It's for a 5 mile radius of the airport, of a airport, and it's probably going to be sort of a major airport, not Griffin, Georgia. No, too small. Sometimes we may access weather from a nearby airport. So you're flying into this little airport. Let's find a correct color here that will work. Dark blue. There's the airport down here. We're going to fly into that airport. Well, they don't have a TAF. However, Coeur d'Alene has a TAF. We could use it since we're fairly close. A terminal area forecast. We may use that weather because it's so close. But if it's much further away, you would not be very accurate. You would want to use an area forecast. We have, okay, so if you have it, this graph, the chart's going to be difficult for you to see, but if you have the testing supplement, if you'll, you have one at home, look for figure 22. If you don't have a copy of this at home, you can simply download them for free. It's a testing supplement. It comes with, when you take your written test, it'll be, you'll have a copy of that to refer to. Anyway, look for figure 22, then area 2, which is right up here. We have ways of accessing the automated weather reports. You'll see right here, Coeur d'Alene. We look at this airport here. By the way, it's magenta. What does that tell you? It does not have a control tower. Okay, so we look at the little block. There's the little block here. This little block here tells us about the airport. And we see AWOS. AWOS, Automated Weather Observation System. It's an AWOS-3. And there's the frequency, 135.075. So a typical question on the exam would be, how would you get weather information at, what would be one way to get weather information at Coeur d'Alene? Well, it's you tune 135.075 into the radio and you listen. Or if your drone pilot's going to be operating this area, you could go to the Chart Supplement US and look up this airport, and there will be a telephone number that will connect you to the same automated weather report, and you can listen to it. Just for grins, you ought to pause this video and research it, look it up, and call them. It's not a long distance call, I don't think. But give them a call, find out what the weather is in Coeur d'Alene today. It's available to whoever wishes to have one, to hear it. We can also access the report to a flight service station, of course. That is probably the easier one, because we do not have, most drone pilots don't carry around a transceiver to listen to that. And besides that, we're on the ground, so it's difficult to hear if we're not very close because it's line of sight, etc., etc. So we call the flight service station, or we go to the website, make that call, or go to the internet portal at www.1-800-WXBRIEF.com, and we find these same reports there. Flight service stations communicate directly with pilots for pilot briefings, weather briefings, flight plans, in-flight advisory service, search and rescue, aircraft emergencies, notices to airmen, either through the telephone or through the website. Flight service stations do not provide air traffic control. They do not provide clearances to take off or land, nor are they able to give hotel and air restaurant fuel prices for specific airports. Okay, they're interested. They're equipped to provide weather, NOTAMs, emergency communication, missing aircraft notification, and pilot briefings. That's what they do. That's their thing. That's why they're there. And it is no longer federal employees, but it's subcontracted out, highly regulated though. Now, there's conflicting information out there. As a manned aircraft, totally encouraged to call them up and talk to them. But there are some sources that say that they prefer not to talk to drone pilots. I have not found verification for that thought. But for the exam, for the test, for the written test, the FAA written test, they do ask questions about this. And here's one of the questions. When we make a phone call to weather brief, we may ask for a standard brief, an abbreviated brief, or an outlook brief. Okay, so what are these? What are these briefs? Standard brief is everything. They give you everything. You tell them who you are, where you're going, or what your plan is. And what kind of aircraft. They need to know that as well. If you're a drone, you don't have to talk specifically what kind of drone. They just want to know you're a drone. But if you're a manned aircraft pilot, there's a world of difference between a Cessna 150 training aircraft and a Boeing 747. So you do need to be specific about what kind of airplane you're flying. All right. So these three kinds. These are verbal briefs that you do over the phone. Standard briefing contains detailed briefing, concerns flight planning. If we're going to call for a briefing, you ask for this. This is the first thing you ask for. An abbreviated briefing is more appropriate for a local flight when a standard briefing has been obtained earlier. So if you've already got a standard briefing and you just want an update, you ask specifically for an abbreviated briefing. Otherwise, they're going to cover all of the things there's a lot to cover, generally speaking. Outlook briefing would be something that you would do the day before. So what do you think tomorrow's going to be like? You tell them all the same things: who you are, where you are, what you're going to do, what kind of aircraft. But if you just want a general idea of what it's going to be like tomorrow or later in the week. Right? Hey, CFR 14 CFR 107.49 is pretty specific about what you're expected to do as a pilot, as the remote pilot command. You have to assess the operating environment, consider the risks to persons and property in the immediate vicinity, both the surface and the air. This assessment must include local weather conditions and local airspace and any flight restrictions. The graphic here shows you a typical 1-800-Weather Brief website, so I would encourage you to look through that as well. If you do the flight service, they'll ask you to log in and give a password. You need not be fearful of this, because there's several benefits to this. One is that every time you log in, they'll already know, the website will have cookies, and they'll already know you're a drone pilot, and they'll tailor things to your interest, and they'll know where your base is anyway, so they'll tailor things to you. But the other thing is that the regulation 14 CFR 107.49 is telling you this is what you must do, so you have now a record. That website will keep a record of the fact that you, as pilot command, did check the weather. So if something went awry, something did not work out well, and the FAA is asking you, so did you check the weather? You can say, yeah, it's on the yeah, they've got a record right there. I checked the weather. Just so you can just be thoughtful about that as well. So you have a record that you actually accomplished what you're supposed to do. Now you might have screwed everything else up, but at least that you got right. So there are other websites as well. Aviation Weather Center is another source. You don't have to log in here. So there's different sources. You need to explore some of these, not necessarily for the exam, but for your own experience. And yeah, we have sort of covered this before, so I'm probably going on and on about something that you're already familiar with. Let's keep going here.